Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back, and we are here at D&D. That's right, it is Dungeons and Dragons with Crazy Light Bulb, and we are here to talk about how to cast spells. Now, basically, when you're a spellcaster, you get something that is called cantrips. You get to, and depending on what your class says, you get a certain amount of cantrips. Now, cantrips, they are something that doesn't require spell slots. What are spell slots? Well, depending on your class and what your class says, you get a certain amount of spell slots at a certain level. So let's say if you're level 3. If you're level 3, you get, I believe, 4 level 1 spell slots and 2 level 2 spell slots. I believe so. I could be wrong. Now I have to double check my work, which I don't have the book next to me, so well, I have this book, but I don't want to scroll up anymore. I don't have the grid. But I know for a fact if you're level 1, you get 2 spell slots at level 1. Every spell that you learn throughout the game, whether it's level 1, level 2, level 3, you can cast with a spell slot. Now, if you're casting a spell with a spell slot, if it's a level 1 spell, you can either use a level 1 or higher spell slot to cast that spell. Now, certain spells get bonuses when casting it at a higher spell slot. But see, the difference is certain spells can only be casted at certain spell slots. So if you have a level 2 spell slot, or you have a level 2 spell, you can't cast it at a level 1 spell slot. But you can cast a level 2 spell at a level 3 spell slot. I know this tends to be a little bit confusing, but let's go ahead and let's see if I can find it. So let's go to 100. Okay, actually, we can actually scroll up and we can go to... So for example, we have the sorcerer. If you see this grid right here, you see that at level 1, a sorcerer gets 2 level 1 spell slots. And now you see, how many spells does he know? 2. How many spells does he or she know at level 2? 3 spell slots. And he gets another spell. Only certain spells, and as you're leveling up, you get more spell slots. Now, when you get more spell slots, you're able to cast those higher level spells using those spell slots. Or you can cast lower level spells using those spell slots. So that's pretty cool. So I hope this grid kind of helps you understand what's going on. Now, let me go ahead and zoom in real quick so you get a bigger chance of seeing what we're talking about. There we go. Alrighty, so we're going to go back to 183, and we're going to go back to this page. I don't think it's the exact page, because I'm actually on, it's actually 201 to the book. So now we're going to be talking about cantrips. Cantrips, ooh. Cantrips are spells that you can cast as much as you want because they do not use spell slots. They are weak spells. But this is basically your bread and butter when you're early level. When you get more levels, you can actually do other things. Because of your mental focus and gestures, you have to be proficient in the armor that you're using and you're wearing to be able to cast a spell. Otherwise, the physical armor is too distracting for you to actually cast any spells. So if you're a wizard and you're in armor, like full plate, you can't cast spells because it's too clanky, it's hard to move, you can't move your fingers right, you're not used to it. But if you're proficient in that armor and you know how to use that armor, then you can cast the spells. So, cantrips are basically spell level 0s. You basically don't have to burn any spell slots, you just cast them as you want. Some spells are useful, some spells are good. Rituals. Rituals are really good. Rituals are stuff that you can cast anytime without using a spell slot as long as you take 10 minutes and you have the right components. What are components? Well, we'll talk about that a little later. But rituals are really fun. So if you wanted to cast Detect Magic, you don't have to burn a spell slot. Just take 10 minutes and cast the spell. It takes 10 minutes out of your time. So if there's like a burning building, you really don't want to do a ritual cast because then the building will be burnt up in 10 minutes. Casting a spell. Bonus actions. A spell cast with a bonus action is specifically swift. When you do the spell slot, when you use a bonus action for the spell slot, you cannot use any other spell except for a cantrip with a casting time of 1 action. So, to answer your question, can you use Healing Word and Sacred Flame? Yes, you can. Can you use Healing Word and, for an example, Magic Missile? No, you cannot. Doesn't work that way. You have to cast a cantrip with your bonus. You don't have to, but that's an option. Or you can actually make a regular melee attack if you wanted to. But trying to cast 2 spells at one time is impossible. You can only cast a bonus action with a cantrip or just 1 regular spell as an action. Reactions with spells. Reactions with spells, basically such as counterspell or holding your action to cast a spell, you must be specific to what you're casting and why you're casting it. And don't worry, folks, the DM has to be honorable on how they're playing when they're doing it. So don't worry if you tell your DM, hey, I'm going to be casting counters, or not, you don't have to say that, but hey, I'm going to be holding my action so I can cast Fireball, and then all of a sudden the creature gets out of sight and goes into full defense because he knows you're going to cast Fireball. Yeah, that's not gonna happen. When you're taking a reaction, tell your DM what you're doing. Or if you're holding your action, tell your DM what you're doing. Longer casting time. Certain spells have longer casting time, such as reviving spells and other that. Some takes 10 minutes, some takes an hour, such as Hero's Feast and stuff like that. So every other spell requires a certain amount of time limit. Most spells require just 1 action. Some spells have a duration, but we'll go over that a little later. Ranged. Certain spells have range and certain spells are up close. Spells will tell you if it has a range, such as Magic Missile, that targets a creature. If there's a spell that's Fireball, it actually targets an area where you want to fire at. Doesn't have to be a creature. Some spells, the creature only has to hear you. Other spells, you cast on yourself, or you cast on other of your allies. Now, components. This is the fun part. We have verbal, somatic, and material. Verbal is exactly what it is. It requires you to be able to speak the incantation to cast the spell. Somatic. Somatic includes gestures and forceful incantations with your hands that allows you to perform this spell. Materials. Materials allow you to either use a components pouch, which you have to constantly have those resources to actually cast it, or you have what is called a spell focus. Most of the time people use a spell focus because it's so much easier to do. Because if you have a spell casting focus, such as a staff, a wand, or even, what is it called? Mistletoe, if it's a druid, a holy emblem, if it's a cleric or a paladin, you're able to cast it without using the components cost. Now, if the components on the spell, the materials on the spell, require a consumption of any kind, such as if it requires gold, or if it requires to consume an item, at that point you have to have the component itself to cast that spell. So let's say you're casting Revive or something like that, and you need a diamond. You have to have that diamond with you. You can't use your spell focus now because that diamond will be consumed. Now, if you're casting a spell such as, I don't know, a cantrip, Firebolt, or Fireball, you don't need anything, you just need your spell casting focus. Or, if you wanted to go with a little bit more role-playing, a little bit harder to cast spells, you can use the components pouch and collect and buy, which I see no point in doing, but I guess it's good for role-playing purposes. But basically, you get to use your components pals to actually store and use your components. So, duration. Certain spells have durations. Some spells last for 1 round. Some spells last for until the next turn. Other spells last for can last for 10 rounds, 10 minutes, an hour. Certain spells are instantaneous. Means they happen on the spot. If they're instantaneous, they'll tell you usually it's a 1 action to do so. Otherwise, it'll tell you it's going to take 10 rounds to do this, or it's going to take a minute to cast, or it's going to take 10 minutes to cast. So, don't worry about that. It'll usually say on the spell itself, if it takes 1 action or so many amount of minutes to cast it. Concentration spells. Concentration spells are really good spells, but they do require your concentration. So, how do you lose concentration on your spells? Well, I'll tell you. Concentration on your spell depends on when you take damage, or if you do a certain action that cancels out the spell. If you cast another concentration spell at the same time, you automatically lose the original spell that you cast. So if you had invisibility and you cast greater invisibility, you would lose just to say, I know that's kind of silly, but you will automatically lose the first invisibility spell. So, now, concentration, when you take damage on a concentration check, you automatically have to roll. You take half the damage that you took. So if the damage you took was 10, you would automatically have to make a DC 10 save, Constitution save, so that you can keep that spell going. If you took 20, or if you took 28 points of damage, your DC would be 14, because that's half of that damage that you took. So the more damage you take, the higher your DC when rolling to make sure that you remain concentrated with that spell. Now, certain spells that require concentration, let me tell you. Certain spells that require concentration would be, invisibility would be one. Another spell would be, I believe it is called Witch's Bolt, or Witch's Lightning. Gosh, I can't remember it. Oh, I know it. But anyways, those spells require Constitution checks, and if you get hit, it's gone. But usually concentration spells last for a certain amount of rounds. So that's the benefit of concentration spells. Now, schools of magic. There are different types of schools of magic. Abjuration is the protective nature of spells. Magical barriers negate harmful effects and banish creatures to other planes. Conjuration spells summon creatures to aid, such as animals, fey creatures, or even divine beasts. Divination usually is all about healing, and it's usually about healing and going towards a higher power of spell. Enchantment spells. Enchantment spells usually affect certain creatures that cause them to do certain things. Usually it's more like, kind of like mind control, as I would say. Now, evocation spells are the manipulation of magical energy, such as, basically, evocation is like elemental magic, but there's different types of evocation. Illusion magic is exactly what it is. It's all illusions, such as invisibility, or even creating illusions so people would be distracted by the illusion spell, or basically tricking someone's mind. Necromancy, that's exactly what it is. It's the spells that manipulate the death and life energy. Transmutation, just like Full Metal Alchemist, it is exactly like that. You transmute things into different things. You can also transmute yourself into other creatures, such as polymorph and other such like that. And there are certain other things. But that is what transmutation is. Those are the spells. So, now, being incapacitated or killed, you lose your concentration spell. Casting another spell that requires concentration, you lose that concentration spell. Taking damage, if you fail the DC save that you have to make, you lose that concentration spell. So I'm glad we have that. So as you can see, there are certain things that we do here. There is line spells, there is cone spells, there is cube spells, there is spear spells, and there is cylinder spells. So just be careful on what kind of spell that you're doing. Some attack only enemies, some spells attack everything. So be careful. Now, areas of effect. There are cubes, cones, cylinders, lines, spears. Be careful on what you do. If you need to, go look at the Xanath's, I believe it's right, yep. The Xanath's Guide to Everything. It will give you more description on the cones and the spears and what they are and how they look like. And what you can do with those. Now, saving throws. Certain spells require saving throws. How do you determine your spell saving throw? Well, we went over that in character creation. Spell saving throw is 8 plus your spellcasting modifier plus your proficiency bonus. Plus any other special modifiers that you may have. Some magical items actually give you special DC saving throws. Such as attack rolls. Attack rolls are the exact same thing as melee and ranged attacks with weapons. Except you're using spells. So instead of using an attack like strength or dex, you're actually using what is called wisdom, charisma, or intelligence to cast spells. It's really fun. It's awesome. Now, combining magical effects. You can actually do that. Certain magical effects can actually work together. Such as, I believe if you are, let's say if you are the life domain of cleric and you cast healing spells. That combination works together because you heal more because of the blessing ability that you have and other magical effects. Some actually work, let's say if you're going to use fairy fire, which allows everybody to get covered in magical fairy dust to where they are glowing with divine energy. So it makes them easier to hit, so you have advantage on the attacks. So then, when you attack with Scorching Rays or Eldritch Blast, you have advantage on those attacks against the creature that you just shot at. See? Combinations are fun. You just have to figure out which ones work with you. Anyways, so on and so on. So that is basically how spells work. Spells, there are numbers of spells that you can see here. Everybody has certain spells. Bards are more of the illusion spells and more of the different types. They really don't focus on elemental or transmutation usually, but they have a good variety. Mostly, they have more verbal spells and more spells that require no materials rather than some materials. But, as you can see here, these are the spell list. Clerics cast spells that usually heal, and usually cleric spells are usually only for the clerics, and some only for the paladins, because clerics are healers, and every class has their own little things that they can do only specifically to them. Druids are exactly the same. They have more earthy type and more elemental type magic, and more conjuring woodland beings and other such. Paladins, same thing, but paladins are more towards, I will hit you and I will invoke my damage and make it even worse than it is before. Whew. Rangers are all about when you're using your spells and combined with your ranged attacks or your melee attacks. That's kind of similar to Paladin. Paladin's the same way, but Rangers can focus more on ranged when they use their spells. Now, we also have sorcerers. Sorcerers have different types of spells. They are very open to almost every spell in the book, except for a couple that Rangers have and that clerics have and that everybody has. Warlocks have a certain amount of spells. Most of their spells require them of their Patreon that enables them to do certain types of spells. Like they are the only ones that have Hex. They are the only ones that have Arms of Hadar and stuff like that. They also are the only ones that have Eldritch Blast. Now there are ways to get other spells to other classes, but that's when you take feats and stuff like that. Wizards. Wizards are basically the ones that have the biggest list of spells that they can do. Because why? Because they're wizards. They can learn almost everything. Except for some cleric stuff and some divination spells and some hex and some warlock spells and a little bit of this, but mostly they have almost every single spell in the book that you can possibly get. More than sorcerers, way more than sorcerers. So if you want versatility and utility, you go for wizard. Alrighty. So as you can see here as an example, Acid Splash. Acid Splash is actually a cantrip, I believe. It is actually a conjuration cantrip, so that automatically tells you what it is and what type of spell it is. The next, it takes one action to cast it. Its range is 60 feet. It uses verbal and somatic, which means somatic, hand motions, verbal, speaking. The duration is instantaneously, means it happens right away. And it tells you what damages are what. So on a D6, acid damage if it fails a dexterity saving throw, such and such. And second level abjuration aid tells you the same things. Duration lasts for 8 hours. Action takes one action, and it happens instantaneously. So, but it lasts for 8 hours. So every spell is different in its own way. When you make your spellcaster, make sure you get to pick your spells that you want to use. If you are a druid, if you are a paladin, or if you are a cleric, you get to change your spells around every day. You get to pick a whole new list of spells every time you take a long rest and you restart the day. Now, when you level up with a warlock and a sorcerer, and I believe a bard, I'm not too sure about the bard, you actually can change out your spells. You're allowed every level to change out one spell for a different spell. And usually you get to pick a new spell on top of that. Wizards are the only ones where if you get the spell, you keep the spell. And there's no changing it. But but wizards do get to have a crap ton of spells, because they learn basically 2 spells every level. So they're pretty ballin'. Anyways, that is spellcasting and spells, and I am Crazy Lightbulb, and I want to thank you for watching my channel. Please like and subscribe, and if you want to see more, please ask me what you want to hear, what advice you want, what you want me to explain to you, or if you want me to play a certain game, I'll be more than happy to play that game. Thank you guys again for joining me. I am Crazy Lightbulb again, and peace out.